We move on to the second part of this scene, Prospero's relationship with Ariel. We are now introduced to a new character named Ariel. Ariel comes from the word air. Now, Ariel is introduced as an airy spirit in this text. He confirms in the Tempest, the play, later in the later part of the play, that he is not human. So it makes all the more mysterious for us to find out as to who this non human character is in this text. So, what we would study is we would be looking at the relationship of a major character, that is protagonist, with this airy spirit. Now, regarding Ariel, the critics all this while have been wondering as to what did he look like in actual sense. Now, if we look at certain different images, in fact, we can these are different images wherein people, different critics, perceived Ariel to be in Tempest. Like, for example, different book illustrations, or we look at different production images, or it could also be some costume images of Ariel. All these images, if you Google, Ariel's images, these are the ways that people have perceived Ariel to be, considering him as a potential non-human subject in this play Tempest. Ariel is a matter of study to us, who happens to be a very important character in this text, who happens to be a servant to Prospero. Now, if we talk about a servant, I would say servant or slave, I believe, is the biggest tragedy in anybody's life. You don't have to use your brain when it comes to being a servant. All that you are expected to do is follow rules. So imagine the plight of Ariel, who is a slave to Prospero. Before we further, deal into the two characters, Ariel and Caliban, which we would discuss later on, these two characters, are projected in this text on the basis of how monstrous they are. But at the same time, what is important to discuss here is the play also depicts the colonial nature. We find the colonial nature in this text, and this is clearly depicted through the relationship that Prospero has with his two slaves, that is Caliban and Ariel. Again, both of them are very different and very contrary to each other. We have Ariel, who is more obedient, and contrary to Ariel, we have Caliban, who is rebellious in nature. So, I would like to bring in here the discussion about some historical facts. History is again very important when we talk about Tempest. So while Tempest was written, it happened to be somewhere in the early modern empire. Alright, and when we talk about early modern empire, we are talking about England specifically. And when we talk about the time when Tempest was written, we need to consider three facts. One is colonization, globalization, and slave trade. Now, why is it that we talk about colonization? I would say, in fact, it was during this time that England was evolving as the most productive nation. In fact, England was exploring and visiting different places. It was, learning different ways of different people. And I believe it was this phase of Shakespeare's writing wherein we see him not only as an experienced writer, but it seems that through Tempest he is asking some of the questions to the rest of the world, or I would say he would like to explore some problems, not only with England but with the rest of the world. And these were the things wherein, like for example, there was an alien world that was yet to be explored that nobody was aware of. And probably Shakespeare was trying to discuss all those explorations by the people of England through this text. Um, Places like, an unexplored, uninhabited island, which is also the very much the part of our Tempest play, also talks about the time that England was into exploration. And whenever there is colonization, it has to give a platform to globalization. So England started exploring places and gradually, in fact, colonizing them. There is, through these two characters, Ariel and Caliban, we also get a reference of the slave trade. And let's not get deep into the history. We have ample examples as to how, people were brought in and made slave. So Shakespeare automatically through this text does open a window wherein we as readers peep into what existed during those times of his writing. We move on to the lines wherein the relationship of Prospero and Ariel is being discussed. Let's look at the first line. All hail, great master. I come to answer thy best pleasure, be it to fly, to swim, to dive into the fire, to ride on the curled clouds. Now, this is a clear, indication of what kind of relationship he shares with Prospero. He's introduced to us as a servant. But there are few things we need to consider in this dialogue. When he says that, hail master, tell me, I'm here to do whatever you suggest. And the lines, which says that, tell me, you want me to fly, to swim, to dive into the fire, to ride on the clouds. This makes him, gives a different dimension to his character altogether. In fact, look at the possibilities. Now he is somebody who can do anything and everything for Prospero. Ariel happens to be Prospero's, eyes and ears in this entire play. We know that Prospero is a magician. He has this magical ability to create storm and tempest, and whatever he wants, it is Ariel who gets it done. And in the very first scene, the illusion that we get of the real storm, the real tempest, is all because of Ariel that we see here. So this character becomes so appealing in our text. So it is Shakespeare who gives Ariel a different human personality, and we wonder at this character. Further, we see Prospero asking us to, did you perform the task to the point, the tempest that I had told you to do so? To which Ariel says, to every inch. What an obedient servant. In fact, he's somebody that you can just rely, or he's somebody that Prospero relies completely. And no doubt we can say that it is because of this quality that Ariel has that he becomes the eyes and ears of Prospero in this play. Interestingly, in this conversation between the master and the slave, we not only explore Ariel's character, but we also get an insight into Prospero's other side of character. Now look at his question, right? When he says that have you performed to the every point, to which Ariel says yes, to every inch, and not a hair has been perished. Now this is something so important, right? Further, Prospero also wanted to inquire as to are they somewhere close by near the shore, to which Ariel says, yes, close by, my master. And are they safe? This again is important. The fact that he creates Tempest, there's no doubt that the story that we get to know from Prospero as to how his brother Antonio took advantage and wanted to see to it that somehow he gets rid of his Duke brother Prospero, even when he had an opportunity to take revenge, right? He did not, he in fact made it sure that not a hair is even disturbed. Now, he might sound revengeful, he might sound cruel, but this side of Prospero is something that is worth taking a note of. Further, we also come to know that what seemed like all of them had drowned in the first scene, nothing has happened to these noblemen, and all of them are dispersed. Now, this is important. All of them are scattered somewhere around this island, and a special reference is here given to the king's son, Ferdinand, who happens to be another important character that we would explore in the later part of the video. He especially mentions that I have especially landed him on the different part of this island, and he's sitting there with his folded arms, and he's sitting there and probably thinking that he has lost all his people and feeling sorry for it. Now, an obvious question as to why special treatment to this particular character. There might be some obvious reason that we would come to know later, and why are different people dispersed here on this island. And Prospero has his own plans. This is just the beginning of the small story that he has just started off. Now we move on to the new character to be introduced in our text. This character happens to be a witch named Sycorax. Now, we know that if you look at the time that is spent by Prospero on this island is 12 years. So the play begins somewhere in the present, and then we keep digging into past. So in this scene, initially we are introduced to three characters on this remote island. The current inhabitants of this island, they are Prospero, Miranda, and Ariel. And it is through Ariel and Prospero's conversation that we come to know that there was somebody else that lived much prior to Prospero and Miranda or Ariel arrived. So now we talk about this new character, that is Sycorax, which is a foul witch, portrayed as an ugly, old, blue-eyed, heck-damned witch. This is just the reported, in fact, information. She's not physically present in the text. She happens to be somebody who is outside the boundary of our play, and she's just being discussed by the other characters who are presently now the inhabitants of this island. So naturally, what it means is she happens to be the former inhabitant who would have been removed by the present one. So this witch is a female, and she has this powers, and in fact that was the reason that she was thrown here as a kind of a punishment on this remote island. uh, she was charged for mischiefs manifold and sorceries. So if you're talking about, Psychorak, who was punished for her, powers which deals with magic, is Prospero any different to that? He too has magical powers, just as Sycorax enslaved Ariel. Prospero is doing the same thing. So that also, questions, puts a kind of an emphasis on questioning Prospero's character. But somehow, Sycorax is described in a more negative way, and all that we know about her is through these characters. She doesn't have, she's not given a voice to speak about her own self. And it is, in this conversation that we come to know that Ariel was, put inside the pine tree for 12 years. And what was the reason? The reason was Ariel wasn't just ready to carry out her orders, and this was the reason that she imprisoned him. Again, if she has imprisoned Ariel, what has in fact Prospero done? Again, is there a difference between these two characters that have magical powers? And through the story, we also come to know that it was Prospero who pitied Ariel and saw him suffering into this cloven pine, and he removes Ariel from it. And it was during this period that she died, and Ariel was enslaved into that pine tree forever. Further, we also come to know about the other aspect of Ariel. Look at the lines. Is there more toil? Do you want me to do something more? Since thou dost give me pains. Here there's a clear reference of the slave trade, colonization that I was talking about earlier. Let me remember thee, what thou hast promised, which is not yet performed me. Now this also takes us to the past between these two people. So you have promised me, freedom. What will a slave wish? You have promised me this freedom, and I hope to remind you that you haven't done it so. Alright? Prospero has forgotten, and so he says, as to why are you, what do you demand? To which Ariel says, my liberty. As I said, to be a slave to somebody is the last thing that anybody would wish. To which Prospero, don't forget, in fact, the way I in fact freed you. So he reminds Ariel as to, it's too early to ask for freedom. I have enough of obligations. Later, Prospero reminds Ariel as to how he heard him crying and he was in pain, and how it was Prospero's, magical power that he just broke the oak tree open and let the suffering Ariel out. And later, something very important to be noted here, he says that, okay, turn yourself into nymph, and you need to be subject to, but thine and mine. So Ariel is visible only to Prospero and none of the other characters in the text. This makes this character so important. We move on to the third part of this scene, Prospero, Miranda, and Caliban's relationship. Let's look at different images portrayed by different, people when they think of, Prospero. I'm sorry, um, Caliban, who happens to be a deformed, ugly person as portrayed in the text. Now let's look at the lines. Look at Prospero's line. We cannot miss him. Now here his character becomes very important for Prospero, as he is the person who is responsible to make, fire for Prospero. He is somebody who fetches wood for them. He is somebody who does all the other, household chores. In fact, uh, when we look at uh, the way Caliban is addressed, unlike Ariel, Ariel is never addressed as a slave, but Caliban is clearly addressed as slave, prisoner, poisonous slave, is portrayed as hairy and ugly, deformed offspring by the devil himself, is considered to be head-born, wicked dam. In fact, we also see that, Caliban is not not treated the way Ariel is. In fact, no doubt Caliban supplies all the basic necessities of life to Prospero and Miranda. In fact, he helps them to survive. Yet, Prospero's treatment towards Caliban is very different to Ariel. Of course, there is a reason behind that, which we will be discussing later. But what we see in this play is, two different, servants, and their treatment treated very differently compared to Ariel. And this puts us into questioning the play itself. It's like, is the play an attempt, kind of a satire on the moral right of the native habitants? In fact, we know that, England was experimenting, exploring colonization, and they happen to be that conquering race, and it is Prospero who portrays that conquering race in this text, who imposes, its will upon the inferior one. Here, the inferior ones are and the Ariel and the Caliban, who are not so powerful the way Prospero is. So it was during this Tempest time that, it marks, I would believe, the beginning of the colonizing impulses, and which also, give rise to some social and ethical concerns about the conquering race and the subdued one. So the two slaves that are discussed here, that are portrayed here in form of Ariel and, Caliban, they highlight, in fact, the two servants in the play, they highlight different pieces of, colonization, globalization, servitude and slavery. If we look at the more logical interpretation of Caliban's name, Cali means beauty, and you can say, ban or bane. Now we can translate it into different ways. It is like, bane of beauty. This is how, Prospero sees Caliban. And the second way of looking at it as opposed to Prospero, is he's banned from beauty, or we can say beauty is his bane. So Caliban is shown as a symbol of negative impact of civilization. uh, the way he is described in the play by Prospero, it doesn't give a pleasant image. As audience, we already have a bad feeling about him through the discussion, through the lines by Prospero. We know that he is a native of this island, and Prospero being the foreign power who comes and dehumanizes its local people. Here, Caliban happens to be this local people. So, constantly, Caliban in this text is presented as savage, and we judge him from the way he acts. Um, and even if we look at Caliban's history or his um, heritage, we know that he owns this land more than Prospero. And when we look at these lines, when he says that this island is mine by Sycorax, my mother, and you have taken it from me when you came here, and then there's the entire history of uh, how he was so much needed for Prospero and Miranda to survive on this island. He was the reason that Prospero could explore this island. So when we look at these dialogues, line 332, we might feel sympathetic towards Caliban, and he, though he is shown ugly and deformed and not somebody who has a noble birth, uh, we see him, or we view him from his otherness. Psychologically, we need to understand his character as to how Caliban has been affected by this slavery by Prospero, or how he has been shaped by Prospero and Prospero's treatment of Caliban. There are other interesting facts which in fact gives a different image and interpretation of this character here. When Prospero says that you are lying, you are a slave, and you don't need my kindness, you are filthy and you don't need any human care, and I have lodged you in my own cell. This is all that Prospero could do for whatever Caliban had done for him. We again start, questioning as to, was this treatment because of his monstrous look, his deformed shape, or his hag-born heritage, and maybe all these factors of otherness makes him more a kind of a villain, and no doubt because of this treatment that Prospero gives him, Caliban is angry and he acts accordingly. Look at the next line, wherein Prospero says that I cannot give you any more, care and sympathy till thou didst seek to violate the honor of my child. Now, this piece of information is so very important. In fact, Caliban did attempt upon the chastity of Miranda here, and And look at the interesting response that comes from Caliban. Oh, wouldn't had been done, thou didst prevent me. I had peopled else this isle with Calibans. So, in fact, here, when he attempts to, in fact, be physical with Miranda, I don't think he wanted to use sex as a mere form of uh, entertainment or a biological need, but all he wanted to use sex as a political weapon in populating this island. The other important fact to be discussed here is no doubt the text suggests colonization and how these colonizers tried to raise in fact these colonizers executed their power to in fact dehumanize the local people. But at the same time, something positive to be noted here is these colonizers tried to raise these savage people from their level to what they were. Right here, there is a clear message that we get from Caliban in his communication with Miranda, that you taught me so many things. And Miranda says that I took so much pains to teach you things. So, education was something that was, I would say, gifted by these colonizers uh, to these uh, native people, to which Caliban is so angry with these, to the father and the daughter, that all that he could say is, you taught me language, and I'm really happy for that, because now I have learned how to, in fact, curse you. So that is the kind of gift of, speech that Prospero and Miranda have given Caliban. He is thankful that he has learned how to, in fact, abuse these two, though is arrogant, no doubt about that. But Prospero and Miranda do take, interest in nurturing Caliban and taking care of his education. Again, there was a win-win kind of the thing here. They had to teach Caliban, only then they could communicate to get things done. But apart from that, Prospero did take care of Caliban until he did not seek to violate the honor of Miranda. So if you look at Prospero and Caliban's relationship, it was like while Prospero was here on this island, whiling his time, uh, he was he didn't have much things to do on his hand. So what did he do is he started teaching language to this thing. He is mentioned here as thing, not even human. All that Caliban could do is blabber some sounds. He never knew what is language, what are words, what are things called. And Prospero takes all this pain in teaching him this new language. And Caliban ends up taking more of negative of what was taught to him. And he's very negative in his approach. Again, there are psychological reasons behind it, and it is more so of his treatment of Prospero.